Oh, hey, I'm Coco, and welcome to our talk show, Single and Too Tired to Mingle. We'll be talking about relationships with ourselves, our exes, our kids, and other important beings. So stay tuned. Hi, Kathrine.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
we're super delighted to have you. We're going to be talking about relationships today, romantic relationships, and very interestingly, cross-cultural relationships. So you have a PhD in social psychology.
Yeah.
And you have written many articles actually for the Huffington Post as well. And you specialize in relationships and very specifically romantic relationships within that cross-cultural or within cross-cultural couples.
Yep.
So what I would like to know first of all is how you came about to have this very specific interest.
So I was telling you earlier that this is like the question I like the least because to be honest, I don't have this like crazy compelling story. I wish that it was some kind of like personal, narrative that led me to it, but I ended up actually like stumbling into this realm.
Okay.
So about 20 years ago when I started to see my first clients, I was really interested in like empowering women. And so I ended up working in the domestic violence realm. And I thought it was going to be straightforward. You go in there, you teach individuals about, better mindsets, about better skill set in terms of how to choose, partners, empower them, and then like everybody's happily on their way. And what I learned was that the whole realm of relationships is a lot more deeper and complicated than I had ever imagined. Mm-hmm. So lots of what I learned was our early childhood experiences, our traumas, our dynamics within our household really leads to the partners we pick, how we conduct our relationships, who we're drawn to, who we're attracted to, who we let in our lives. Mm-hmm. And so that then spurred a whole interest of itself. And then that's how I ended up then moving in that realm. And cross-culturally, like my background is Armenian, but I grew up in the US. Mm-hmm. So I always had struggles sort of figuring out what cultural space to fit into, especially when you have two very different cultures, Eastern and Western. There is, it almost feels like sometimes when you're succeeding in one, you're problematic in the other, and like vice versa. So I always had a hard time sort of bridging the gap between these cultures. And part of why then I was really interested in the cross-cultural dynamic within relationships. And then, I ended up in London, where there is so much diversity, thankfully. And that's what I ended up studying, sort of merging my interest in culture and relationships, and then ended up doing a dissertation in Eastern and Western philosophies on relationships, on mate choices, on marriage, on family influences, and then stumbled into setting up a private practice in London. That it seems like in metropolitan cities, the better you are with your career and the more engaged you are with education and career, the more sometimes you can struggle in relationships because the same rules of success don't apply. And so, that's what I do nowadays.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that. So we've been taught actually, as long as two people are in love, that they can overcome anything, and that once we're in love, everything else will fall into place. Yeah. So what happens? Why does everything not fall into place?
Why are there so many breakups and divorces?
Exactly, right? We all start off so in love. And
exactly. Is it a fluke? Like, we never really in love? Did we choose the right wrong partner? Or is
what is love? It's a different question. Maybe we can touch upon that one a little bit later on.
Oh God, that's another.
Is that another show?
Another, exactly.
All right.
Podcast in itself. But here, essentially, like the simple answer is that like the emotions of love and falling in love and feeling chemistry and connection to a person, that's one aspect of a relationships. And then what I say, there's the mechanics of the relationships. Right. There's the admin stuff, right? There's the day in and day out, how we handle finances, how we handle chores and responsibilities, dreams and hopes, and where we're going to live and who's going to do what in a relationship and whether we're going to have kids and stuff. And so the initial dating bit is the falling in love. It's all of the intensity of the emotions, which we can really do well. But then once we start to actually merge our lives together and start to build a life together, all the admin stuff comes into play, and it starts to take away from that lovey-dovey spark space that we're in.
That we all love. Love to love.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's where it's like, people have to really think about whether they, yes, have chemistry and have strong feelings for someone, but actually how they would work together as a joint team, essentially, doing and creating life together.
So when do we have that conversation about the admin stuff? Because while we're in love, it seems like, do we really want to talk about that?
It'll pull you out of it.
But once we start talking about it later on, we're like, actually, I now don't have that attachment to you and I don't maybe want to deal with it.
Yeah.
So when is a good time to discuss admin?
I think from the very beginning, in small bits, wherever it sort of feels right and it applies. So we don't want to ask the hard-hitting questions about how much someone has in their bank account or whether they're in debt or not, right? But like early on, starting to notice how someone might manage their finances and how you manage your finances. So noticing little things and bringing those things up. Where would you like to live? Have you thought about, having kids? How do you envision your sort of future life to be? Those kinds of questions can be woven in while we're having fun. And actually, what I find is that when you have the sort of a mix of a serious tone as well as the fun and exciting stuff, it actually creates a much more complex and interesting relationship. So you want to do it from the very beginning. You just want to know the level of depth you're going into with all of that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, like we were saying, small problems can be discussed and resolved sometimes in one conversation, but why does that often not happen? Why are we discussing the same things day one that we're discussing 10 years later if we manage to get that far?
Why do we avoid having significant conversations early on when they're still small? It's something about human beings and wanting to avoid any conflicts or issues if they can get away with it. It's the same reason why if you have a slight ache and pain or some kind of small issue, why you avoid going to the doctor, right? You're just kind of hoping it just works itself out. Sometimes it does, but often in relationships, small problems over a long period of time can become very messy and complicated. And I think people sometimes have a hard time gauging whether something is significant. Let's say there's something small that's annoying, like there's different sleeping habits, right? And they might go, well, I don't want to make it like an issue. My partner wakes up an hour early and then it wakes me up, but whatever. But that small issue, now, if you are with them over a long period of time, day in and day out, can like start to develop into a massive problem. So I think even if something appears small, it's important to talk about it in the beginning, because again, if you have a perception that I'm going to be with this person for a long period of time, those small things add up daily over time, and also a little bit of small things here, and another small thing there, another small, suddenly can like compile into a big problem. And where I tell people is that like when they're initially small issues, they're just maybe differences in how you do things, differences in habits, or your partner doesn't even realize that they're doing whatever that they're doing. So in the beginning, it's easy to solve because it's not so personalized and you're not so heated about it. But if you let any of these small things develop into big things, they go from it's accidental, it's an overlook, it's just a habit, to character flaws. They don't care about me. They're so careless. They're so selfish. They're so whatever. And so that's the language then we start to like develop, because our perception about our partner, now that they've woken us, for the 100th time, it's no longer, they don't mean to. It's they're selfish and they don't care about me. So that's why you want to tackle those from early on. And I don't think people anticipate how serious these small things can get. And so, do not wait for them to clear up on their own. The other thing with like bringing up problems is it actually, ironically, can strengthen the relationship and can strengthen the bond between two people. What I find with individuals that really focus on having lots of fun together and having exciting times is that their relationship ends up being very fragile because it can't handle anything difficult or serious, right? And so as it happens, if you stay with someone long enough, even if you don't bring up any problems, life will.
Correct.
Right? Life will throw something.
Life takes care of that, yeah.
Yeah. And then suddenly you don't have the skills, you don't have the strength in your relationship. We've never talked about problems, and now suddenly we're supposed to talk about someone losing their job and what that means, right? And so it's think about these small problems as almost like resistance training at the gym, right? Little by little, you're adding a bit of weight, and suddenly
way to look at it. Yeah.
like it transfers, all the emotional stuff transfers very clearly to like physical stuff. So just the way that we take care of ourselves physically, you know, we might not brush our teeth for a day or two or whatever, and might not notice any immediate problems, but you leave that long enough and the problems are going to get so severe and big. Same thing with emotional stuff. So if there's any issues in the relationship, bring it up and have the objective that like, as we work on it, we are strengthening our relationship.
Yeah, I like that.
And we're building a bond, right? A team that knows that we can have fun, but we can also solve issues together.
Yeah, it's amazing. Sounds really good. What about if one of the two partners is bringing up something like the sleeping thing or some other kind of trip, which is maybe like a trivial thing in the beginning?
Yeah.
But they're aware that it might become an issue later on.
Yeah.
So they're kind of willing to talk about it and resolve it, but their partner either doesn't feel like there's an issue with this.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're now threatened. Oh, you're saying this to me. How do we get past that kind of disparity?
So that sounds like it might be either a communication issue. You might not be bringing it up in the right way.
Okay.
And so it's creating a space where they're suddenly on the defense.
Right.
Versus taking an interest in that problem that you're bringing up and trying to work through it together, right? So that's definitely what a big part of what I see in my clinical work is that the space that it's brought up isn't a constructive one. So it suddenly puts the other person, it feels like they're on the other side of the team and now they're having to sort of fight you against this issue. So think about when you're bringing it up. So lots of times we will bring it up in bed at night. This is a very typical one.
Okay.
You know, it's like you've had all day to do all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And then it's at night, you're finally connecting in one place. And then
you've got your list out.
Yeah. Hey, you know what?
Yes. You've done all of these things.
Yes. And you know, on one level, it makes sense. We're in a comfortable setting. You can't get away.
Yeah, that's the one.
Talk about it. All right. But on the other hand, if our partner's tired, agitated, has had a long day, they're not in the right mental and emotional space to want to talk about this, right? Especially if you're going and you're doing this. Right? That in itself, again, so their mood's not in the right place, and now they're having to take a defensive stance because you're accusing them. Right. So a better way to bring it up is when you guys actually are having a nice time, when things are, maybe you're out for a walk, maybe you're on your way to dinner, and so there isn't a seriousness, a heaviness to when you're bringing it up. We're already enough easy setting, and then we sort of casually initially bring it up. Hey, you know that thing that you sort of often do? I know you don't realize often that leads me to feel, whatever it is. I get really kind of tired, or I get really irritated, or then that leads me to have to do extra work in this way. So I know you don't mean to, you probably don't even realize it, but that's what's happening. Can we work on changing that? Right. So the issue is brought up, but there's no accusation. So that your partner doesn't have to defend themselves against anything. You didn't accuse them of anything, but you're still stating this is a behavior, and then you're saying this is how I'm experiencing it, and you probably don't even realize, right? So again, you're letting them off the hook. They don't have to say, I didn't mean to do that, right? You're already telling them, I know you don't mean it, but it's having this negative effect on me, and how can we work together on this? So you're then connecting yourselves. And so that is one way to try to solve problems. Now, hopefully your partner should be receptive to that. But your original question was,
thinking about that,
what if they're not?
They
also, the other reason they might not be receptive is this might be a hot topic for them, right? So they might feel that whatever it is that you're bringing up that you're accusing them of is a sensitivity point for them. It's something that they got told off when they were kids or whatever it is. They have sensitivity points to them. Or it feels like it's a mark on their character, right? Like, I didn't mean to, I'm not a bad person, or I'm not being selfish. And so they'll start to defend themselves. So again, you want to remove those barriers to their character, their accusation. But if they continuously resist, like working through something with you, I'd say that's potentially very problematic, because there are individuals that just have a very hard time trying to engage in any kind of verbal communication about issues.
Right.
They didn't grow up in a household where problems were talked about, right? They have very sensitive points. They have lots of insecurities that get like triggered every time a problem comes up. And so that's a whole then other set of stuff that that person has to work on, some of that stuff. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to have these open communications, and issues are going to start to like pile up in the relationship.
And you can never talk about them at the same time.
And then we go back to your earlier thing about what happens when small problems aren't addressed, right? Then they become really big ones. I think sometimes people really focus on the positives in the relationship. They think about how many interests we have in common, you know, how great we get along, how many hobbies we can do together. And all that stuff is great. But what people don't take into account is that there's this whole other aspect to a relationship, the difficulties, the challenges, the discrepancies in our habits, the emotional stuff. And if you have an amazing relationship in the positive stuff, but you cannot deal with any of the negative stuff, that's your relationship as well. Right. So no matter how great it is on this side, if this isn't working, you're only at, let's say, 50% functionality. So it's important to really gauge how well we are at working through problems and communicating that, because if that doesn't get dealt with over time, it overrides the fun and the love and absolutely, it overrides the positive
Which is so sad at the end of the day, right? Because everyone starts off really well. So just touching on your cross-cultural specialization, is there a difference? Like how big are these gaps based on how similarly we grow up, or how our cultures are different when we get together and when we meet each other?
It depends. I think I mentioned in the beginning, it depends on how different the two cultures are. The more different that they are, the wider the gap of the sort of cultural rules and norms of each culture, the harder that couple is going to find in trying to work together. Because think about, as a relationship, you're coming together. If you're thinking about a long-term relationship, you're eventually going to come together in the physical space. You live together, but now you're sharing an emotional and a psychological space. Your hopes, your dreams, your wants, your desires, your habits, all of this are now going to be strongly influenced by another individual. So if you're coming from cultural backgrounds that are very different, this is going to be where you start to like clash, because what you take as normal, as the way things have always been done, suddenly to them that sounds odd, right? Where, like, for instance, if you come from a cultural background where family connection and family togetherness is a big part of that culture, and let's say families often live together or like live next door to one another, and they're always in and out of each other's homes and lives, and then your partner does not come from a background like that, that's going to be really challenging, right? If your parents are at your home every other day, and if they are commenting on your relationship, or, commenting on the way you guys are running your lives, that's suddenly going to become a problem. And what people perceive as issue between the two individuals is often just like a cultural difference. And so that's where then I have to get along or get involved and say, look, this isn't about your partner not respecting you enough because she or he is allowing family members to be involved in the home, right? Because the other person that, let's say, doesn't come from a cultural background of family being involved will often feel like you're not prioritizing me, right? Like your parents are always over. Why can't we on like Sundays just do whatever? Why do we have to always go to dinner? And it doesn't feel like, you're respecting me and our time. And it's not necessarily a respect issue. It's just a difference in how we perceive family togetherness. And so I have to sort of strip the layers away and be like, okay, let's get back to down to the basics. Is this a cultural difference? I mean, it's not like when we find out it's a cultural difference, the problem is solved. Then we have to like negotiate what's okay and what's not. But at least it takes it out of that like charged space of like, you don't care, you don't respect me, you know, all of that. So yeah, I think again, with cross-cultural couples, I always tell them, in order to bridge the gap between your two cultures, if that's very different, it's going to require a lot of patience, a lot of communication, a lot of negotiation, a lot of having to adapt to one another. If you feel like you have that in you, you both have that in you, then go for it. But otherwise, you're probably going to face a lot of challenges, because if you are similar when it comes to values and background, it's an easier relationship. You don't have to talk about everything because you're just similar in that the way that you do it, right? So the more different you are, and this doesn't just mean like culture, it could be religion, it could be family like dynamics, it could be the countries we grew up, whatever, right? It could be socioeconomic background, but the more different you are in key like values and principles, the more difficult it's going to be to have to negotiate that mutual space of coexistence.
All right, okay. So before couples come to you in such a scenario, kind of in what state do they come to you? Have they been together for a long time? And
happy, loving state. I wish. It'd be so much simpler.
And is it easier? Like, what if just one person sees an issue and the other person doesn't see an issue? Like, how do you get over or deal with that?
In a lot of cases, I do get that. It's someone has flagged the issue sooner than the other. Usually when it comes to men and women, it's the women that, you know, so in heterosexual couples, it's women that often drag their partners.
Right.
But I will say...
Drag being the operative word.
Exactly. Yeah, we're gonna have big problems if we don't go to these sessions, right? And or it's been left, and she's been saying we need to go, and nothing's been done until it's gotten quite messy, and now we're at a potential split, and he's like, oh, okay, I guess now we have to do something about this. So, but I will say what's interesting about this dynamic is that once they come in and male partners are given a space to actually like vent what they feel and are listened to and heard and acknowledged, because they don't often know how to do that, stand up for themselves and communication, and they're not often as good in their communication style as women are. Suddenly it's like it's a space where they can get their feelings and thoughts out, and so it changes. And sometimes I have the men that want to come more than the women.
So how do the women react to that? Now all of a sudden, their husband or partner has a platform that he's heard.
Yeah, not well sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us more about that, because like we said in the previous interview, it's oftentimes, oh, it's your fault. You're the person that's dragging this relationship down. It's you. But now, let's say in this case, the man has a platform, and now maybe she sees, oh, maybe it's not all you. Or do women see that? I don't know.
Yeah. It depends on the woman, but I have had lots of cases where then suddenly, the male partner isn't the one that has to fix everything. And I'm also giving him almost like a more support in being able to express himself, because I can see he's at a disadvantage. And so it's a really interesting, this is where, like, as a therapist, it gets interesting when we're dealing with couples, because when you have an individual client, you can align with that client and try to acknowledge their needs and feelings and like make them feel heard. It's a really important part of therapy that your client really feels like you get them. But in couple sessions, when you're really getting one partner, the other feels like you're really not getting them.
So they feel you're taking sides, maybe?
Yeah, they can feel that you're taking sides. That can certainly come up. They can feel that they're just, you just don't get their perspective. You align more or find more similarities, let's say, with their partner, and so you're naturally taking their side more. So it becomes a dance that a therapist has to do when they're seeing a couple, to be able to help each person understand that it's not about the individual. And so this is always my spiel when I get couples that coming in. It's like, I always very clear say, I don't have an alliance to either one of you, right? I'm not interested in your individual positions. For me, if you're in here because you want to keep your relationship together, you as a couple is my client.
Right.
So I always have the higher needs of the relationship in mind, and which means that at some point you're doing something that is undermining the couple, or you're doing something that's undermining it. So at some point, each of you is going to get called out.
Right.
But what I always say is like, if you do feel that at any point that I'm leaning towards one side or your side isn't getting heard, speak up.
Right.
Speak up, because this is the kind of space where if we're able to communicate things clearly, then you can use this as a model to do that at home as well.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that's
You
quite
learn
good.
how to
Yeah, that's
communicate
it.
your needs. Because, you know, I'm just a person. I'm not always going to get everything right. So I say, when I don't, just like your partner won't, it's on you to go, hey, hold on, you missed something there, right? And when you do, now we can have a much deeper, interesting conversation. Now, if you say, hold on, this is missed, and I just go, well, that's not a big deal, right? I dismiss it or minimize it. Now that's an issue for the person who's minimizing it. But each of us, it's important that if we don't get heard, if we feel, you know, minimized or undermined, to say something. Because I think in movies and romantic relationships, it's like when people fall in love, it's like suddenly they just know they can read each other's souls, right?
How problematic are rom-coms in the world of love?
Oh, I get triggered watching that. I get triggered. I can't stand watching rom-coms. You almost have to turn your brain off.
Right. Okay. Because I think a lot of women maybe take that as a template as how a relationship should look like.
Yeah.
And if it's not looking like that,
gosh, who doesn't want to take that as a template? It seems so easy.
That's it.
Yeah, especially if you don't come from a family background where you've seen it done right.
Right.
So you're missing a model.
Right.
Right. And so naturally this whole genre comes in and goes, here's a model. Right. And we often talk about love as in such sort of this healing thing, right? And so you're watching the movie and you keep hearing that like you're just supposed to just love yourself, just love yourself, and then everything will be okay. So you see like love as some kind of elixir to everything, and it's like, no, like if you're conducting your relationship the way that like rom-coms run it, I guarantee you 99.9%, if not 100% of the time, it will fail.
It's so harsh.
Falling in love part might work all the time, but
they seem to forget about the admin part, right?
That's it. Yeah.
Maybe that's a new movie to make. Maybe that's a new movie to make. Rom-com plus admin.
Wouldn't it be a fun movie to watch? Just two people waking up. The kitchen's a mess.
That's it.
Do the dishes. That's
Okay.
It's not the fun bits.
I think you touched upon a really interesting point when you said if you didn't have that template at home.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's talk about single parents.
Yeah.
And then you've got single parent with maybe boys. Let's say it's a mother, most commonly.
Yeah.
Let's say you've got girls or you've got one of each. How does someone who's a single parent cater to that template that hopefully their children grow up with a healthy view of relationships?
It's, in all honesty, it's going to be a lot more difficult, right? It's a lot easier when there's two. I mean, children are just difficult to have to raise to begin with.
Right.
And to have to do it all on your own and try to model what a healthy relationship looks like without the other person is a challenge. But if there is a partner around, the co-parenting could be a healthy model. So what kids need to know is that within the context of relationships, we can have problems, we can have challenges, we can have disagreements, but the intent is always to try to work through it, even if it means we're not staying together, but that respect is demonstrated, people are allowed to say and express their emotions, not in destructive ways, right? This isn't like we give space for anybody just to vent their aggression and anger, but, you know, kids need to see that, like, parents can work through challenges together, whether or not they're together or not. Co-parenting is still, you know, and I get quite a bit of clients coming in that actually are at the end where they're splitting up, but they want to make sure that their co-parenting relationship which is in place, which I just like, I think that's so amazing. I commend them for it. But yeah, if you have the other parent in the children's lives, then you can model that that healthy sort of dynamic of walking through things together. And if not, you have other relationships you can model it. You have friends, you have other family members, you have your own parents, right? To show that if I can be heard in a relationship, I'm willing to hear the other person. I'm willing to sort of figure out, work together to try to figure out mutual solutions. And then we have fun and we do all the other stuff together. But I think with single parents, I will say it's going to be harder, but try to do it if the other parent's in the children's lives, or use other relationships as a model for it.
Amazing. Should we be teaching, I'm just thinking, instead of saying, oh, you and I are in a relationship, should we be teaching the fact that there's 3 parameters in a relationship? You, me, and also the relationship. Yeah. Would that make it a little bit easier for people to understand kind of how things are supposed to move along for everyone to be in a positive state of mind?
Yeah. And one of the ways that I help people understand this concept is that, like, the relationship, I think people like you're saying, they forget that a relationship is an entity of their own. They sort of just go, okay, we fall in love, and then it just like is. Right. Whereas no, a relationship is like the third entity in your dynamic. It will require communication. It will require time. It will require. So it's not just about the two people. The two people have to think about the relationship, almost like when they're created a child together. They have to think about the child, right? And it's like, are we giving enough time and energy to our relationship? Have we sat this week and talked about some of the admin stuff or some of the challenges we've had? So to really understand that the relationship is something that two people are creating together, and every action or inaction they take will affect the outcome of that relationship.
I think it's quite a visual way to think about it, that we're taking care of you and me and the relationship. I think when you kind of extract that out, I think it makes it a little bit easier maybe to see how we would manage that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also helps not personalize everything. Because sometimes it's like my win means that the relationship loses. So if we're able to do that, it's easier to make sacrifices because we both know we have to commit our time to the relationship, right? And so maybe I haven't done that this month. Maybe I've been so busy with work or doing other things, I haven't put that time in. So it's not like I'm sacrificing my time because you're so needy. It's like, no, the relationship requires this of me.
So are you in favor of date nights?
Yeah, I am. Because especially if you're parents or you're at a stage in your life where you're very busy, it takes concerted effort to have to create that space to nurture the relationship. But date nights, I think sometimes it sounds like talking to couples can add another layer of pressure. It's like, we have to like get dressed up and make, like plans and da-da. So I'd say like think about date nights more loosely, less in terms of, again, how we see in the movies, where you have to get dressed up and go out and do something, but as a time and a space of connection. So it could just be like a bath together, right? It could be like something, like getting together and sitting in front of the fire and just like relaxing. What you want to do is connection. So date night is not sitting in front of the TV.
So we should make it connection night.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because you can get away with like going to the movies or doing,
not even,
exactly. Or sitting at home, just like where people almost avoid any kind of like true intimacy. So date night is about connection. I don't care what the activity is, but it has to be about two people coming together. Yeah.
So in your practice, do you find, or maybe not, that people kind of go from relationship to relationships and somehow their problems are always the same with every partner? So I think a lot of people will kind of look at themselves and think, what is happening here?
Yeah, this is one I often get from singles, is like they'll call me up and say, look, I've been going from like date to date or relationship to relationship, and I seem to be making concerted effort to choose a different person, right? But all the people like that I'm like date seem to be unavailable emotionally, or they're all jerks, or whatever it is. So what in the world's going on? And although I don't understand what's happening, I'm the common denominator.
There's a pattern.
So there must be something, right? And there generally is, but not in the way that we tend to think that there might be a problem. So I think most people go, what is wrong with me, right? Like, what's missing? Am I not smart enough or pretty enough or funny enough or whatever it is? It's not those things. There's some kind of internal model that you have about relationships that is naturally drawing you to certain types of people, or not helping you filter out the wrong types of people, or to tolerate certain types of behavior and stay in that relationship long enough that now you are emotionally like invested and connected. And so now when it's very obvious that they're problematic, it's hard for you to like get out of it. So it's our internal modeling. And this is why sometimes friends and family will understand what's happening. They'll go, but you're great, you're the best, you're the loveliest, you're the whatever. Because our relationship issues often come up in romantic relationships.
Yeah, okay.
We can be great in our friendships, in other areas of our life. We have our...
So it's not the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. Yeah. So our parental relationships, our caretaker relationships, those sort of initial intimate bonds with individuals that like we depend on, that stuff is the foundation that we use then to model our romantic relationships. So we can have amazing friendships and just be very confused, and their friends are like, you're the most loyal and dependable and wonderful person. And then when it comes to relationships, we might be the unavailable ones. We might get freaked out and like pull away, and no one can understand why. Yeah. So like, that's where like my job is to sort of like dig underneath the surface. We look beyond your looks and you're funny and you're whatever. Like, that's not, those characteristics are surface level characteristics. We have to figure out what your internal modeling is and then work from there.
So how difficult is it for people to dig into that?
I think sometimes the more people think that they've had the idealistic childhood, the harder it is, right? So when someone comes in and goes, right, like I was clearly abused, I was clearly neglected, that's almost easier because it's so obvious. But it's the subtleties where someone comes in and goes like, my parents were great, they were loving, that, you know, like there are no obvious issues. That's where we have to really like, because it's not about necessarily abuse. You have to think about this from a child's perspective. A child is incredibly vulnerable in this world, right? Like when they come into this world, they have no ability whatsoever to look after themselves and address any of their needs. So you have to have parents that are very tuned in to this child, right? Like very, very tuned in. But let's say they're young parents and they've just gotten married and they are still working to sort of survive to build their careers, or they've just moved to a new location and they have no other help around, or someone's passed away and one of the parents is in deep grief as a result of it, or there's postpartum. There can be all kinds of other issues going on, or there's other siblings to take care of it. So that's where I meticulously have to go through someone's life and just keep poking around to be like, you know, and then sometimes people will say things like, oh yeah, I was really like gregarious and, you know, outgoing and stuff. And then my parents said like at age 5, I suddenly became very shy. Okay, well that's not a character change. Something's happened at that time. So then, it's kind of my job to sort of like poke around and try to figure it out. But to those who might want to like take that work on themselves and see if they could sort of figure it out, I'd say have a conversation with your parents, not from the perspective of like, what did you do, right? But just like ask lots of questions about their experience when you came into the world, right? Like how prepared did they feel? What else was going on? Did they experience you as a difficult child? So you want to get an idea of the environment you came into, because the earlier the mishaps that happened in terms of your age, the more that they're going to have had a deep impact. So this is going to be points where you might not even remember at age 1, 2, or 3, or whatever. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Is it me, or is it just harder to find a relationship when you're older?
No, I think it's everybody that's older. I
Like, times have changed. What's happened?
It's just you. Everybody else. No, but everybody else is in the same boat. Yeah. Okay. So it is it is definitely harder to find relationships when you're older in a way that you didn't anticipate before.
Right.
So I think we think that as we get older, we get wiser. We have lots more experiences, and so we should be better at figuring things out. So a couple of things. Firstly, there's some environmental factors. So when you're younger and you're in your 20s, you're always out, right? You're out and about. And life at that stage is all about having as many varied experiences as possible. So you're just open to new things and you're coming across lots of new people.
Right, true.
So as you get older, you have your friends, you have your life, you have your career. Like, how often are you open and encountering new experiences, right? You're just not. So you're not going to be meeting lots of new people. It's very easy to meet a variation of people when you're younger. And in fact, when people are younger and they come and see me, I sort of encourage them to try to stay off the apps because they have a very social life, right? So try to emphasize real world. So when we get older, our world becomes smaller. So that's one environmental factor. We also become a little bit more set in our ways.
Really?
Unfortunately. Right? We know what we like. We don't want anything else, right? This is where hotel we like to go to. This is what, all this, and this is the type of people we like, right? I won't tolerate anything else, right? And we have less to risk, or we have more to risk, right? So when we're younger, like, whatever, I'll go anywhere. I don't have a career yet. I'll move with you halfway across the world or whatever. But like, things matter no more when we're older. And so we don't want to just like give up our Friday nights or whatever it is. Like, it has to be the right person. And I'm not going to be as flexible, and there's more at risk. And now I might have kids as well, so I'm not going to compromise my time with them to go on. So I think it's our habits and our psychology as well about sort of being stricter and rigid about what we want makes it all a lot more difficult. Not to mention, because we're older and we've already probably had lots of relationships, we also bring more baggage. Right, so our baggage and then their baggage better line up, because if it doesn't, oh boy.
But we need to have the admin talk quite early on. What to do with all this luggage. Okay, amazing. What about the difference in dating when we've met someone on an app versus real life? Is there a difference? Do we treat them the same?
Yeah. I wish there wasn't, but there is. I have yet to hear someone go, "Oh my God, I love app dating," right? Like, it's exhausting. And the way...
What makes it exhausting?
So just the sheer volume of people. The sheer volume of people that you have to go through with essentially no information. Right? And there's no, like... The beauty about dating is the human connection, right? It's like, we are all looking for the spark. How the heck are you supposed to look for that spark, on your phone? And so it's mentally draining and exhausting. It's the difference between like going out into the real world and like going and doing a fun activity and then sitting at home and watching a movie, right? With someone else doing that activity. It's just not the same experience. So we need to have like human-to-human connection. That's what makes dating interesting and fun. The other thing is it's just too much strain on us, like, to try to figure out from the thousands of profiles, the two that you would like match with. So it puts a lot of strain on us. It drains us. It's not like a fun experience for us. So the way I like try to help people approach this is that don't think about it as online dating. I think we do a big disservice by calling it that. You need to call it online filtering. So you're going through a filtering system, right? And if you were applying for a job, it's like, it's the part of the job where you're sitting on your computer and looking up like jobs. Like, it's boring. It's the most boring and tedious part, and then applying for that. right? Who enjoys that process? It's just not, right? But with a job, you need it, right? You don't go, well, I'm not, this is too boring. I'm not gonna, right? So when people complain about online dating, they go, it's just not me. I'm like, it's not anybody, right?
Okay.
No one's designed this way to like enjoy this process. So think about it as a filtering process. The dating only begins once you've met in real life and there's a connection, and then you want to continue to see one another. But before then, it's not supposed to be fun. It's just not. So but if it's one of your only ways of meeting new people, use it for what it is, right? To introduce new possibilities into your life, right? You would never be able to encounter half the people that you encounter online. So that's what it is. But don't let the medium use you, use it. So focus on getting those connections to real life as quickly as possible. What I see with a lot of people, it's like they almost use it as like an emotional, like a dopamine hit. So they'll have hundreds of matches, and then it fools the mind to thinking, I have hundreds of people,
hundreds of options that you would have in the real world.
Out of that, maybe one would work, right? So don't let your mind play tricks on you. So you want to reduce the number of matches, no more than 10, I recommend, and then actually engage in
going through them before you do anything else.
And then try to get it to real life as possible. So if you stay on it long enough, it's like you're staying on a computer again for hours. It'll mess with your head.
Interesting. Kathrine, that was like amazing, interesting, and so much information. Is there anything that you would like to finish with? Any like positive view for our viewers to take away to make the relationships better?
Okay. I don't know if this is going to come across as a positive message, but don't be as sentimental about relationships. I think like we approach love and relationships with this like fantasy, and it always fails fantasy. But in actuality, if you engage with the right way and you put in the work and you really try to understand your partner and yourself and communicate and stuff, to me, I think what you can build is so much more than a fantasy, right? It's like getting a healthy, nutritious, substantial meal versus like eating cookies. Like the cookies are fine, but you feel like crap afterwards, right? And so that's the sort of similarity analogy I can use for relationships is like if you do the work, if you put in the work, the outcome is a lot better than any like movie fantasy that can be built. It's wholesome, you feel it, you're grounded in it, you're calm, you feel that you can depend on this person and vice versa. You have a history, memories together, you have ups and downs. Like it's the substantialness of life versus the movie stuff. So don't be like too sentimental in the beginning. Engage in it with the mindset of I'm gonna do some emotional work, and then let the magic happen. Right.
That's amazing. That's an amazing message, Kathrine. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Absolutely.